Welcome, witches and wizards, to another deep dive into the darker corners of magical history. Today, we're exploring the story of a wizard whose shadow loomed large over the magical world decades before Lord Voldemort was even born. A charismatic, revolutionary, brilliant duelist, and the man who nearly brought the wizarding world to its knees in the name of the greater good. I'm talking, of course, about Gellert Grindelwald. Born in 1883 somewhere in Central or Eastern Europe, Gellert Grindelwald showed extraordinary magical abilities from an early age. Like many European wizards of his time, young Grindelwald attended Durmstrang Institute, a school known for its less restrictive attitude toward the dark arts compared to Hogwarts. At Durmstrang, Grindelwald's brilliance became immediately apparent. Teachers noted his exceptional talent and intellect, perhaps surpassing even Albus Dumbledore's abilities at the same age. But alongside this brilliance grew something darker, an obsession with pushing the boundaries of magic and a dangerous fascination with power. Unlike Tom Riddle's secretive nature at Hogwarts, Grindelwald made no effort to hide his interests or ambitions. His experiments became increasingly dangerous, and his views on wizard superiority over muggles became more radical. By the age of 16, even Durmstrang, an institution far more tolerant of the dark arts than most, couldn't overlook his dangerous experiments. In 1899, Grindelwald was expelled from Durmstrang after nearly killing several fellow students with his experiments. Rather than learning his lesson, this rejection only fueled his resentment and convinced him that others simply couldn't understand his vision. It was a pattern that would define his life. Brilliance twisted by a belief that rules didn't apply to those with grand visions. And what was that vision? Nothing less than the complete overthrow of the International Statute of Secrecy, the cornerstone of wizard-muggle relations for centuries. After his expulsion, Grindelwald became obsessed with a legend familiar to many wizarding children, the tale of the three brothers and the Deathly Hallows. But unlike most, Grindelwald didn't see it as merely a story. He believed these objects, the Elder Wand, the Resurrection Stone, and the Cloak of Invisibility, actually existed and could make their possessor the Master of Death. Grindelwald's research led him to Godric's Hollow in England, where he believed the Peveril family, believed to be the original owners of the Hallows, had once lived. But Godric's Hollow held something even more significant for young Grindelwald, a meeting that would change the course of wizarding history. It was here, in the summer of 1899, that the 16-year-old Grindelwald met 18-year-old Albus Dumbledore, who was living in Godric's Hollow, caring for his younger siblings after his mother's death. The two brilliant young wizards formed an immediate and intense connection. Grindelwald was staying with his great-aunt, the magical historian Bathilda Bagshot, who introduced him to Dumbledore. What followed was 2 months of intense friendship as the young men shared their ideas, dreams, and ambitions, both brilliant, both ambitious, and both feeling constrained by what they saw as the small-mindedness of conventional wizarding society. Their letters and conversations reveal plans of astonishing scope, finding the Hallows, overthrowing the Statute of Secrecy, and establishing a new wizarding order where magical people would rule over muggles. All, of course, for what they called the greater good, a phrase that would later become Grindelwald's infamous motto. But there was a third person in this story, Albus's younger brother, Aberforth Dumbledore. Unlike the brilliant dreamers Albus and Gellert, Aberforth was practical and concerned with immediate family duties, particularly the care of their unstable younger sister, Ariana. Ariana Dumbledore had been attacked by Muggle boys when she was 6 years old, After they saw her performing magic, the trauma left her magic uncontrollable and dangerous. She needed constant care, which Aberforth was committed to providing, but which interfered with Albus and Gellert's grand plans. Tension grew as Aberforth confronted Albus about his responsibilities to his family versus his plans with Grindelwald. This confrontation escalated into a three-way duel between the Dumbledore brothers and Grindelwald. In the chaos of the fight, a spell hit Ariana Dumbledore. To this day, no one knows who cast it, Albus, Aberforth, or Grindelwald. What we do know is that Ariana died, Grindelwald fled England, and the Dumbledore brothers were left to bury their sister and their own guilt. For Albus Dumbledore, Ariana's death was a devastating wake-up call. He abandoned the plans he had made with Grindelwald and dedicated himself to teaching. For Grindelwald, however, it was merely a setback on his path to power. With the friendship shattered, he disappeared into Europe, ready to pursue their shared vision, but now alone. For nearly 2 decades after leaving Godric's Hollow, Grindelwald operated in the shadows, gathering followers, developing his philosophy and searching for the Hallows. Unlike Voldemort, who ruled through fear and marked his followers like cattle, Grindelwald built a movement based on ideological conviction. His message was seductive in its simplicity. The Statute of Secrecy didn't protect wizards, it enslaved them. Why should magical people hide when they could create a better world for everyone? For the greater good became his slogan, suggesting that wizard rule over muggles would benefit both societies. By the 1920s, Grindelwald had gathered a substantial following across Europe. Unlike Voldemort's mostly British Death Eaters, Grindelwald's acolytes came from across the continent: France, Germany, Russia, and beyond. They weren't just thugs and outcasts, but included respected members of wizarding society who believed in his vision. Grindelwald was charismatic, articulate, and crucially, he didn't present himself as a dark wizard. He portrayed himself as a revolutionary, a visionary, and a liberator. And for many wizards chafing under secrecy laws, his message resonated deeply. Around 1926, Grindelwald achieved his first major goal, obtaining the Elder Wand, one of the 3 Deathly Hallows. Historical accounts suggest he stole it from the wand maker Grigorovich, who had been studying it. With the most powerful wand in existence now in his possession, Grindelwald's confidence and magical abilities reached new heights. In late 1926, Grindelwald made a bold move that demonstrated both his cunning and the international reach of his ambitions. He traveled to New York City, but not as himself. Using advanced human transfiguration, he assumed the identity of Percival Graves, an important American aura and director of magical security for MACUSA, the Magical Congress of the United States of America. Why America? Grindelwald was searching for an obscurial, a young wizard or witch who had developed a dark, parasitic force called an obscurus due to suppressing their magic. Obscurials were immensely powerful, but historically short-lived. Grindelwald believed he could harness this volatile power for his cause. While in New York, under his disguise, Grindelwald identified Credence Barebone, a young man living with the leader of an anti-witchcraft society called the New Salem Philanthropic Society. The cruel irony, a potential wizard living with witch hunters, wasn't lost on Grindelwald, who manipulated the vulnerable young man with promises of teaching him magic and giving him a place in the wizarding world. When Credence's Obscurus was unleashed on New York, causing death and destruction, Grindelwald's manipulations were exposed. In the confrontation that followed, MACUSA believed they had destroyed Credence, and Grindelwald's disguise was revealed. He was captured by MACUSA, but this setback would prove temporary. Grindelwald's capture made headlines across the wizarding world, yet even imprisoned, he continued to spread his message, taunting his captors with predictions of a coming war between the magical and non-magical worlds. "Will we die just a little?" he famously asked the officials who interrogated him. In 1927, while being transferred from America to Europe to face charges for his crimes, Grindelwald escaped captivity in spectacular fashion. The details remain classified to this day, but we know he killed several auras and disappeared with a handful of converts he'd made among his guards. Free once more, Grindelwald returned to Europe and accelerated his plans. He established a fortress called Nurmengard in the Austrian Alps, a name that would later become as infamous as Azkaban. Above its gates, he inscribed his motto, "For the greater good." From Nurmengard, Grindelwald orchestrated attacks on ministries of magic across Europe, assassinated opponents, and held rallies that drew thousands of supporters. Unlike Voldemort's reign of terror, Grindelwald's revolution had a political dimension. He presented himself as a legitimate alternative to existing magical governments, which he portrayed as weak and subservient to Muggle interests. At a famous rally in Paris in 1927, Grindelwald demonstrated both his power and his method. Rather than simply attacking his opponents, he invited them to listen. He showed visions of the coming Muggle World War, which wouldn't begin for another decade, but which Grindelwald had somehow foreseen. The destruction he predicted, atomic weapons, concentration camps, mechanized warfare, horrified his audience and drove many into his arms. By 1930, Grindelwald controlled much of Eastern and Central Europe's magical communities. Western European and American ministries of magic were on high alert, but divided on how to respond. Many feared open conflict would expose the wizarding world to Muggles. Others secretly sympathized with aspects of Grindelwald's ideology, even if they rejected his methods. Throughout Grindelwald's rise, one question echoed through the wizarding world. Why wasn't Albus Dumbledore, by then recognized as perhaps the greatest wizard alive, doing anything to stop his former friend? The answer remained secret for decades. During their intense friendship in 1899, Dumbledore and Grindelwald had made a blood pact, magically binding them never to fight each other. The pact was sealed in a small pendant that Grindelwald kept with him at all times, insurance against the one wizard he feared could defeat him. While Grindelwald built his revolution, Dumbledore had become a respected professor at Hogwarts. Though he worked behind the scenes to counter Grindelwald's influence, the blood pact prevented him from directly confronting the Dark Wizard. The forced inaction tormented Dumbledore, especially as the body count rose. The wizarding governments repeatedly pressured Dumbledore to join the fight against Grindelwald. In a famous exchange, the British Minister for Magic told Dumbledore, "It's your move," only to receive the cryptic reply, "No, it's yours, but I'll take it from here." Throughout the 1930s, Dumbledore worked with a network of allies to track Grindelwald's movements, protect potential targets, and search for a way to break the blood pact, all while teaching Transfiguration at Hogwarts and mentoring students who would later become important in the fight against Voldemort. Perhaps most significantly, during this period, Dumbledore taught a brilliant but troubled student named Tom Riddle. The irony that he was simultaneously trying to stop one dark wizard while unknowingly teaching another is one of history's cruelest twists. By the late 1930s, two devastating conflicts were brewing, one in the Muggle world and one in the wizarding world. As Hitler rose to power in Germany, Grindelwald's influence reached its peak in magical communities. Whether the two movements had any connection remains debated by magical historians to this day. When the Muggle Second World War erupted in 1939, Grindelwald used the chaos as cover to accelerate his plans. Attacks on wizarding institutions increased, opponents disappeared. The line between the Muggle War and Grindelwald's revolution blurred in parts of Europe, with some magical communities suffering doubly under both regimes. From 1939 to 1945, what wizarding historians now call the Global Wizarding War raged across Europe. Unlike the later wars against Voldemort, which were largely concentrated in Britain, Grindelwald's war was truly international. American Aurors fought alongside British hit wizards and resistance fighters from occupied magical communities. Berlin, Prague, Vienna, Paris. Magical battles raged unseen by Muggles already devastated by their own war. Grindelwald's forces utilized combat magic not seen since medieval times, while ministries of magic developed new defensive spells and tactics that would later prove crucial in the fight against Voldemort. The toll was immense. Entire magical communities were wiped out. Ancient institutions were destroyed. Magical knowledge dating back centuries was lost. All while the Muggle world tore itself apart in parallel, creating the perfect cover for Grindelwald's atrocities. By 1945, as the Muggle World War approached its end, pressure on Dumbledore to confront Grindelwald became overwhelming. Somehow, the details remain unknown. Dumbledore had finally broken the blood pact that had prevented him from moving against his former friend. In May 1945, just as Muggle Europe celebrated the end of their war, Albus Dumbledore finally confronted Gellert Grindelwald. The location, a small square in Dresden, Germany, already devastated by Muggle bombing, provided a grim backdrop for what witnesses would later call the greatest wizarding duel of all time. For 3 hours, the two most powerful wizards of their age battled with spells most had never seen before or since. Witnesses described the sky itself seeming to crack open, stone turning to liquid and back again, fire and water intertwining in impossible ways, and magical shockwaves felt hundreds of miles away. What exactly transpired between them, what words were exchanged, what memories shared, remains known only to Dumbledore and Grindelwald. But when the dust settled, Grindelwald was defeated. The Elder Wand had changed allegiance to Dumbledore, who would keep it until his death decades later. Grindelwald was imprisoned in his own fortress of Nurmengard, in the highest cell of the very prison he had built for his opponents. There, beneath his own motto of "For the greater good," he would remain for the next 53 years. For over 5 decades, Gellert Grindelwald lived as a prisoner in Nurmengard. His movement collapsed without him. His followers scattered or imprisoned. The wizarding world, like its Muggle counterpart, began the long process of rebuilding from the devastation of war. Dumbledore returned to Hogwarts, eventually becoming headmaster and earning recognition as the wizard who defeated Grindelwald. He would wield the Elder Wand, now his by right of conquest, until his death in 1997, yet those close to him noted that he never spoke of Grindelwald without a complex mix of emotions crossing his face. As Grindelwald aged in his cell, a new dark wizard rose to power. Tom Riddle, now calling himself Lord Voldemort, began his first reign of terror in the 1970s. The wizarding world, still healing from Grindelwald's war, found itself facing an even more ruthless enemy. In March 1998, near the end of Voldemort's second rise to power, the Dark Lord came to Nurmengard seeking the Elder Wand. He found an aged Grindelwald, now 115 years old, thin and frail after decades of imprisonment. Voldemort demanded to know the location of the Elder Wand. In what may have been his final act of defiance, or perhaps a last attempt at redemption, Grindelwald refused to tell Voldemort that Dumbledore had won the wand decades earlier. "Kill me then," the old wizard reportedly said. "Voldemort, I welcome death, but my death will not bring you what you seek. There is so much you do not understand." Voldemort did kill him, of course. After decades of imprisonment and reflection, Gellert Grindelwald met his end not with fear, but with what witnesses would later describe as almost a sense of relief. His final act, refusing to help Voldemort, suggests that perhaps in the end, he understood the flaws in his vision of the greater good. The rise and fall of Gellert Grindelwald provides fascinating contrasts to the later threat of Lord Voldemort. Though both sought domination, their methods and motivations differed dramatically. Grindelwald built a political movement based on ideology. He sought to overturn the Statute of Secrecy and establish wizard dominance, but claimed it would benefit both magical and non-magical people. His followers joined him out of conviction, not fear. Voldemort, by contrast, built a cult of terror. He sought power for its own sake and based his movement on blood purity, an ideology Grindelwald seemed to care little about. Where Grindelwald held public rallies and debates, Voldemort operated from the shadows. Where Grindelwald sought to convert, Voldemort sought to eliminate. Perhaps most tellingly, their approaches to death differed completely. Grindelwald sought the Hallows to become master of death, to understand and perhaps transcend it. Voldemort created Horcruxes, splitting his soul in a desperate attempt to escape death entirely. And in their ends, we see perhaps the greatest difference. Voldemort died in panic and denial, unable to accept his mortality. Grindelwald died with apparent acceptance, even defiance, refusing to help another dark wizard, even to save himself. The story of Gellert Grindelwald offers crucial lessons for the wizarding world. First, that darkness can come wrapped in charisma and idealism. Grindelwald did not present himself as evil, but as a visionary offering a better future. Second, that ideology can be as dangerous as hatred. Grindelwald's belief in the greater good led to atrocities committed not from malice, but from certainty that the ends justified the means, perhaps the most dangerous belief of all. Third, that even the greatest among us can be blinded by brilliance and charm. Albus Dumbledore, arguably the wisest wizard of modern times, was temporarily seduced by Grindelwald's vision, a mistake he spent the rest of his life atoning for. And finally, that the struggle against darkness is never truly finished. The defeat of Grindelwald led not to lasting peace, but to a new threat in Voldemort. The defeat of Voldemort has led to new challenges in our own time. Vigilance, as one famous aura used to say, must be constant. Gellert Grindelwald, revolutionary, dark wizard, seeker of the Hallows, and perhaps the most enigmatic figure in modern wizarding history. His vision nearly tore our world apart, yet his final act may have helped protect it from an even greater darkness. Whether you see him as a visionary led astray, a manipulative tyrant, or something in between, his impact on wizarding history is undeniable. The institutions created to fight him, the spells developed to counter his magic, and the lessons learned from his rise and fall continue to shape our world today. And somewhere, perhaps, the memory of a brilliant young man who once dreamed of power for the greater good serves as a warning about the thin line between ambition and obsession, between revolution and tyranny. I'd love to hear your thoughts on Grindelwald in the comments below. Was he ultimately different from Voldemort? Could he have succeeded if not for Dumbledore? And what other aspects of wizarding history should we explore next? Don't forget to enchant that subscribe button and cast a sonorous charm on that notification bell to never miss another wizarding history lesson. Until next time, keep your wands at the ready and your minds even more so. Mischief managed.